I've not gotten the prompt yet. Okay, yeah, it's showing that it's recording. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, so we can just share your screen and maybe just give you know how we go now the demo of how it will run and what to expect, stuff like that.
Okay, okay. So
Yeah, John. So I gave him host access and he's been able to start recording. I know it's quite early, but I just want him to start recording even now. Sef, we'll just edit it afterwards.
Okay, okay. So like
Yeah.
it would be accepting like people inside. Is that not going to distract him, or it's fine?
So I don't know. I don't know. It's actually distracting. If I remove him now from being co-host, will he still? Let me just check, Sha. Let me see if I can remove him and whether to stop the recording. You shouldn't, Sha. Okay. I think I've removed him as co-host.
I
I
think it's
wish
still
there's a way to
recording.
like. Yeah, it's still. Sorry. God, which street am I on? For God's sake, I don't even know where I am. I
Yeah,
can never go enter one road. Yeah.
sir?
Is
Yeah,
that anywhere?
yeah, the mainland or the island?
On the mainland. I've been on the mainland since like Tuesday.
Okay, where?
Onikpan.
It's not fun. I'll visit now.
I'm visiting tomorrow. I planned earlier, but I'll visit tomorrow.
Okay, alright. Anyways, how far, Nurudeen, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm alright, man. What's up? How have you been?
I have been okay. I'm resting, but
Yeah, rest
yeah, I'm resting now. Like, it's a lot of stress.
or walk the choke.
What the joke? Man.
I just like as I was coming, I realized one of the things I realized was I forgot to tell the people in the house to help me charge my laptop. And I know there's not going to be light when I get back home, and there will not be light till tomorrow. I have designs I'm supposed to work on to submit all those graphic designs for Father's Day. I never finished them. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to church tomorrow. Well, oh, happy Father's Day. I don't know. Right? Maybe I'll just do what these guys did. I'm gonna write it on. I'll do it. I'll do it in a different place.
Oh,
I'll write it in Google Keep and just post Happy Father's Day. Spire, please don't kill me. Thank you. Anyways, Nuruddin, can you share your? Okay, you're sharing your screen already. You can see your screen. I can see your screen.
Okay, okay.
Hmm.
So the basic gist is that there's no deck per se because it's a breakdown. Sure, you get so it's
Yeah.
just going to be me going through the files and everything for the presentation and the walkthrough and breaking down my process and basically that's it. It's a breakdown. And afterwards, then I would give I'll there'll be room for questions. I would share the links to the resources that I used, and that'll be pretty much it. I would select from several of the letters and the numbers, and I will show the process for each of them. I chose the numbers I selected. I selected them specifically because they those ones had unique features that are not present in the others, or that there is general to the rest of them as well. So they all share the same flow and principle.
alright. Sounds cool. Yeah. I mean, I didn't expect you to have like slides. Anyways, since the breakdown of all the designs.
Yeah. So that's it, yeah. So once we start, I'll just explain what the background of 36 days of type is and how I approached it, the process for the specific letters I selected, and then I would give some tips and on how to start, how to create stuff like this consistently on on their own, and how to organize the files and things like that to keep it to be productive with it. Generally speaking,
Okay.
Indoors now. Ah, thank God. Right, so yeah, just sending reminders, everything. Let people join us soon.
All right. It seems like your people might have forgotten, but I guess it's still not it yet. Well, okay. Hmm. Uh, besides, it's still recording, right? So after it has finished recording, whose account does it go to? Yours or Iconic?
That's what I don't know. I'm thinking it might go to his own account. For
Oh,
I don't I don't know. Let's just see how it goes, honestly.
all right, all right. Hmm. Asaz, am I a host?
Yes,
Okay, it's because I just allowed someone inside.
yes, you are.
All right.
Yes, you. Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
Uh, Barbara, is this my Barbara?
You have a,
Yeah.
you have, you have a Barbara.
Yes, no, I get Barbara. Everybody needs a Barbara in their life.
I one.
Hi.
I Remy Martin. Shit. All right.
Yeah, so Nurudeen, what screen are you sharing from? Like, are you going to be navigating there so that maybe you can just check that out now and you can share the screen there so that it serves as like a good background for the conversation.
Sorry, what did you say?
Yeah, I said, what screen are you going to be sharing from so that maybe you can just go there so that we have like a good backdrop for
Oh,
the
okay.
presentation
Okay, okay. Give me a
while
sec.
we wait. Yeah.
Okay. Would you like to share your screen now or after like the introduction? Iconic. Okay, it's not there. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, it doesn't seem to be
I
because
think it left.
oh wow, it's already 8.
Okay. And we don't have other people here.
Other people, what do you mean?
Like, how many people are on the call?
Oh, just 2 people. Like I don't know. Today is a very weird day. Maybe because it rained all through.
Yeah.
It's crazy stuff. Hey, Ron's bad boy. What's up? They even reply me.
Yo, what's up, man? How far?
I'm okay.
How is your side now?
That's good. I entered like a flood today because I was going to see someone. So I'm resting.
Was it worth it?
I mean, yes, it was worth it.
All right, now
Yeah.
that's what matters.
Man, this guy killed it. Look at this stuff. Let me increase my brightness.
Shady wine on me. He be your guy, no one, no more.
This is how I should have learned ABC when I was growing up, not the normal font.
Hello.
Man, okay, let's just wait for like 5 minutes. Let's see if I can drag in more people to this meeting.
Hi, Dami. What's up?
I'm doing great. Good evening. How you doing?
I'm good though. You don't follow us do this Nigeria again now.
What do you say?
I say you be like say you don't follow us do this Nigeria again.
I go good deal. I do not country.
Uh, Pele. Welcome. Good to have you join us.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Wakil. How you doing? So yeah, we've just been waiting for a few more people to join. I know that today people are doing Owambe here and there. Well,
I'm fine.
we
Assalamu
already have a
alaikum.
lot
Good
of
evening.
people.
Well, it's 5 minutes. Mm,
Yeah, so we can get started. I guess just yeah, let's get started.
all right, all
People
right, all
join.
right. So yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to another edition. Sounds like a YouTube show, but obviously this is going to be on YouTube. But yeah, thank you guys for joining in today. Today is about Nurudeen will be breaking down his process on what he did on the challenge, right? He did from ABC, and I felt like we should learn ABC differently because I mean, look at everything he has made. So like I'm John Wright, and I'll be handing it over to Nurudeen so he can take over the whole session. So yeah, have fun.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here to see the letters of the alphabet. We'll be learning ABC today, like John has specially said, and
Yeah.
I'll be taking us through the process I went through to create the 36 days of type. So let's get right into it. So the 36 days of type challenge. This is just a brief overview of the challenge in general. So it's an annual challenge that was set up to get designers, creatives, artists, and different people together to over a 36-day period of time to create different interpretations, different forms, their own takes on the 36 figures of the uh, 26 letters of the alphabet and the 10 figures of 10 numbers, like that's 0 to 9, A to Z. So different people would put their spin on it, design it however they want. Whether you want to draw, you want to design, 3D, animate, and different takes on the Latin alphabet in general. So that was, and the rule of the project is that all the creatives involved should focus on the letter forms and the typography and their own explorations of it, and then they submit it over the 36-day period of time. So during my own process, I didn't start at the same time the project started, but I eventually finished it all the way from A to 9. So I'll be going through my process for several of the figures several of the characters in the Latin alphabet that I created. So the first thing I did when I started this project was simply to create a flow, which is like I would go from designing the logos to creating them in 3D and projecting them in a 3D environment. So when I started, I went online, and in some cases, I didn't even go online at all. I just had to start sketching immediately because it's 36 days. So there is very little time to, like, say you want to do any research, to explore and come up with a logo design. So majorly I explored different logo designs. I did a lot of sketching. I drew out the logos that I was going to be designing in the 2D space. Then from the 2D space, I transferred the logos to the 3D space after completing the designs. So for the project, I used Affinity Designer for the 2D design. So that is after I finish the sketches. When I'm done designing the logos, like drawing them on paper, I transfer it to the system, to Affinity Designer here. In some cases, I just design them right from scratch in Affinity Designer. And when I'm done with them, that is when I'm done creating the logos in Affinity Designer here, like this A, for example. Once I'm done with it, I export it as an SVG that is an SVG to Blender. And the reason why I selected SVG is because that is the specific 2D format that Blender supports for exporting to it and crossing other platform, other 2D files with it, like a logo design. So for the same principle applied to pretty much all the logo designs in the process of the 36 days. So go online, maybe do some exploration of other logo designs, check for inspiration, then do some sketching and exploration on my own, then design a logo. Then once I'm through with the logo, I export it as an SVG to Blender. So once I'm done with the logo designs here now, I will push straight to Blender. So I'm going to close Affinity Designer now and fire up Blender. So, second here. this file. So in Blender, I'm going to start with 2 for this presentation. I'm selecting 2 for this presentation because 2 pretty much holds the processes and my workflow, because the workflow I used for all of them are more or less the same, except for some minor differences, which I'll be touching on in the course of this breakdown. So for number 2, what I essentially did, which is exactly the same for the rest of them, is first of all creating my scene. And my scene is composed of my camera, the floor, which is this curved plane at the back here. To create a plane like this, you just hit Shift A on your keyboard when you are in Blender. You go to Mesh and Plane. Once you create the plane, all you have to do is go to Tab to go to Edit Mode, which is the mode that allows you to manipulate the different vertices and parts of any object in Blender. And then I extrude it up. Then using the bevel tool, that is to create more corners, more edges, I create the floor, and that's simply how the floor is created. So once I'm done with the floor, I set up my cameras. I use 2 cameras, the perspective camera and the orthographic camera. And the difference between the perspective camera and the orthographic camera is that so I'm going to lock the camera into the view so you guys can see the difference. So this is the orthographic camera. What the orthographic camera does is that it puts the object at a specific angle, an isometric angle. That's what orthographic cameras do. They set it to an isometric angle. The perspective camera is just like a regular camera. That's the difference between them. So it's more of, how will I describe this? It's like a regular camera. So the manipulation is, the spacing is different. The adjustments are different. So if I should set this to the default, which is 150, I think you'll see the difference between the difference in the perspective camera and the orthographic camera. And when you want to change a camera type, you can just select it, a perspective, orthographic, or panoramic if you want to use the panoramic camera. So in this one in particular, I use the orthographic camera and I set it as a long distance away to get the particular view that I am looking for. Or rather, the perspective camera rather. And the reason why I selected the perspective camera for number 2 is because I wanted to pull the camera away from the object, that is the 2 figure here, because the angle I was looking for was a wide focal length to give the illusion of illusion of scale, and to pull the object closer, to make it appear closer, make it appear larger, and make the background, the floor at the back, appear far away from the object at the same time. So it just gives that like close-up look to the object. That is the number 2 figure here. That's essentially the scene. Then the other aspect of the scene is the 3 lights that I used here. So when I started, I created 3 lights. That's the fill lights, the rim lights, and the key lights, which are basically, it's a basic 3 lights setting that I used throughout the 36 days. So unlock the camera. So here are the 3 lights. There's the key lights, the rim lights, and the fill light is here at the top. Now the difference between all 3 lights is that the fill light in a camera setting is the light that gives the scene the default lighting, and it's a low power light that just gives a general light to the scene that lights up the scene, that tones down the shadows in the scene, because without your fill light, your shadows that will be cast by the key light and the rim light will be much sharper. The rim light is the light that takes the object, that separates the object from the background. So without it, the object will more or less blend into the background, and it won't be as sharp as the contrast between the object and the background won't be as strong as one would expect or one would desire for the composition to pop out. So for the key light, which is the main light in the composition, is the one that drives the eye towards the object. It's the one that really brightens up the objects in the scene. So depending on the composition, like in these two, for example, now I didn't use my rim light and I didn't use my key light. I only focused on a specific, or rather I used my fill light and my key light alone. I used a separate key light for it, which was a spotlight, because in Blender there are different kinds of lights. You have the point lights, you have the sunlight, you have the spotlight, and you have the area light. So I'm going to open up the object now, the original number 2. So this is number 2 in its full rendering. So the fill light is already filling up the scene. Then the key light is the one casting the shadow you are seeing here. And the fill light is the one casting the shadow you are seeing at the bottom. So the composition is set up in such a way that the object is popping out, because the color of number 2 is already stronger than the color of the background. So there's enough contrast for it to pop out. So I didn't need to use the rim lights in this particular situation. But I would show another one where I actually use the rim lights in the next set. So moving to creation now. So import the SVG logo design that we created for number 2 in Affinity Designer. All one has to do is go to the file, import SVG. So when you find the SVG folder, you select it and you move straight into designing. Once you import it, it loads straight into Affinity. The file, it appears in Blender's File Explorer rather, and it appears here. And I'm going to open the SVG here now. So here's the original. It's to pull it out for you guys to see. So this is the original, the SVG. When it comes in flat. So there is no geometry attached to it whatsoever. So this is how number 2 appears flat on inside Blender's viewports. So once you bring it in like this, then I add geometry to it by extruding it in the properties of Blender, because when an SVG is imported into Blender, it is imported as a curve. So there are two kinds of objects in Blender. There are curves and there are meshes. You can adjust curves in a different manner than meshes because their properties are different. But most of modeling done in Blender is done with meshes. But curves have their own advantages too in using them. And for number 2 here, what I did here was to increase the depth, the extrusion, add volume to it here. Simple like this. And then I added an array modifier to it here. So what the array modifier does is simply to add extra copies of the objects. As you can see here, it can either add it over the x-axis, the y-axis, or the z-axis, because we're in 3D, so there are 3 axes, the x, y, and z. That's the length, the breadth, and the height. So once I added the 4 copies to number 2, the next thing I did was to create another duplicate of number 2, which was strictly in curve mode. And that's the difference between the curve and the mesh that I was referring to. So I'm going to duplicate this now to show the difference. So I'm going to do Shift D, which is to duplicate on the keyboard, and to separate it this way to show you the difference between meshes and curves. So for a curve, to flatten it back to 0, I'm going to convert it to a mesh first. Right click on the keyboard. I'm going to convert to mesh. Then I'm going to convert it back into a curve because I don't want it to have a volume again. So when you, in some cases, when you import it, the object, the SVG file, gets a volume given to it by Blender, and in some cases it doesn't get this volume. But in order to remove that volume, you have to convert it to a mesh and convert it back into a curve. And I do this because I want the figure, the object to appear more like a pipe. I'm going to show you the pipe now. So under bevel, just increase the depth here and you see the pipe take form. And that's how we get the pipe. For the mesh, I'm going to convert it. It's currently in curve mode now, so I'm going to convert it to a mesh so you can see the difference. So I'm going to convert it to a mesh, and I go into object mode, or edit mode rather, using tab on the keyboard. You can see that it now has edges, vertices, or if you want to switch them, you can go to edges and faces here. So this is the difference between the mesh and the curve. If I enter edit mode for the curve, you'll see the difference as well. So the curve only moves on one axis, so you can't change the axis for the curve. It will only remain on that axis constantly, or rather, not on one axis. When you're editing it, the vertices only remain along the edge of the curve. So this is how I created the curves for the mesh, or rather for the composition. So I have pretty much did the same thing to them. I created the duplicate and I added an array modifier to this one as well. So it's a fairly simple composition to save time. So once I do this, I add some other elements to the scene. I add properties and some materials to it. So once I'm done with modeling like this, I add some other objects to the scene, like this cylinder, and I give it some materials, or sometimes I don't even give them materials. I'm okay with I'm satisfied with the color that it has like that. The next aspect I would like to talk about now are the materials. So let's open this for you guys to see the materials. Yeah. To switch to positive and shading rather. So under materials for the 36 days of type project, what I did was that I created different objects. The first one is the volume, which is invisible right here now. It's not visible in number 2. We to touch on it soon. So the volume material is like it's what you would see in a fog. The effect is like seeing the effect of a fog, like the rays of light in a fog. That's what the volume material is. So it basically creates an atmospheric scene. An example of that would be in something like, let me open one of them here. Maybe a good example of that would be 0. So you can see this ray coming upwards in 0. That's an example of volume. What volume does, the volume effect does. When you place a light on an object that you've added a volumetric shader to, the light bounces off particles in the volume and creates a ray effect here. That's what the volume shader does. The next one is the abstract shader. Now, the abstract shader was more or less an experimental shader for me. So I was just exploring different nodes in the shader editor of Blender. So, quick one. The shader of editor of Blender the is the viewport or the area of Blender where you create materials, you edit your materials, you just do different creations for materials in general. And there are different nodes, there are different connections and networks that you can create in the shader editor. And it's a powerful editor because it has been updated quite much since the earlier releases of Blender, and it's a lot more powerful now. There are two kinds of materials in Blender. Those are two kinds of textures, PBR textures and procedural textures. PBR textures are physically based textures. They are textures that you use actual images of textures to create them rather than generating them procedurally in Blender. And procedural textures are textures that are generated mathematically in Blender using the shader editor. That is by using the properties here without uploading any images of textures like grass or wood or sand or metal. Instead of taking pictures of the physical materials and uploading them into Blender, these procedural textures are generated automatically in Blender using Blender's shader editor. So for 36 days of type, I created glass. Let me explain it here. So the glass texture is simply this texture here. It's number 2. This is the glass texture here in the rendered mode. I would have loved to show you guys what it looked like here in the viewport shading here, but it's more or less the same what you are seeing here. This is the full rendering here because it's going to take a toll on my system and it's going to start to slow down because without rendering it completely, the system will have to start calculating the rendering on its own within the viewports. But we are right now in this mode, look dev mode, which is a new mode created by the Blender developers that allows you to preview your renders in a lower quality, but that is faster to editing. So moving into the glass shader now. To create the glass shaders, all you have to do is use the principal BSDF, which is a new shader, kind of like a universal shader. Now, a shader, or rather this node, principal BSDF, is a universal node that allows you to create different materials in Blender. So it has different properties, metallic, specular, roughness, and depending on how you adjust these properties, depending on how you change the values of these properties, you can come up with different materials. Like for example, this glass node now, the reason why it's transparent, as you are seeing here, is because I have increased the transmission all the way to 1. If I drop it below 1, the object doesn't become transparent again, it becomes opaque. So the reason why it's transparent is because it's in 1 right now. So if it's below 1, the object's opacity will reduce. If I increase the metallic property here, the object becomes more metallic and more shiny. So depending on what you want to do, depending on what properties you want, you can just make the necessary adjustments here in the shader editor under the shading tab. There are other shaders here. There's the volume shader, the volume absorption shader, the transparent PSDF, the glossy shader, the glass shader. The glass shader I could have also used the glass shader to create it here instead of using the principled PSDF shader here. So moving to the next one now is the concrete shader, which is simply a shader that I just increased the roughness a lot. In number 2 here, I didn't use it much, so I haven't fully edited it here. So when I want to create the concrete shader, I just add something called a noise texture. Go to search for it here. Noise texture. add a Voronoi. Voronoi texture creates cracks. And then add a mapping node to it. What this mapping node does is to make sure that the texture is well and uniformly projected on your object. So I connected the mapping node to the Voronoi texture, and then I'll connect the Voronoi texture to my base color here, add the color ramp for adjusting the actual color, add the noise to the bump node. Okay, I haven't created the bump node. Add a bump node to add surface scattering to it. That's how I create the concrete texture. Add color to the height. And the other texture, hello, I hope you guys can hear me. I know I've been talking for a long time now, so I need to ask.
Yeah, we're hearing you,
Okay,
you
okay,
guys
guys, I
move,
understand.
move,
All right,
move,
okay,
move,
cool.
move.
Okay, so once I'm done with the concrete texture, I move on to the next texture, which is the marble texture. They all follow the same vein. You add some nodes to it, and all these nodes connect in such a way that they give you the results you desire once you're done. So sometimes I go to actual images of the objects to make sure that what I'm doing is accurate to the lifelike version of it. So for this number 2, these are basically all the materials. So there's metal, which is just the universal texture here, the principal BSDF texture, which has all the properties, and I increased the metallic to the maximum. I added a orange color to it, a gold color to just make it appear gold in color, and there's a plastic texture as well, which is basically the BSDF texture with the roughness increased a little depending on the kind of plastic I want. Maybe I want smooth plastic, or a plastic that doesn't bounce light much, or a plastic that is just a bit reflective. And the last one, is the wood texture. I didn't use this one much. I didn't play with this one much here. So going back to number 2 now. So once I added all these textures, all these materials rather in Blender, then I just start modeling and exploring different forms here. So sculpting this now, what I did here was I added a Boolean modifier. The Boolean modifier would be like a sort of modifier that allows you to create cuts in your object in Blender. You can right now the Boolean modifier has not been like confirmed. And what I mean by confirmed is that I didn't delete, or rather I didn't confirm. I don't have any other word I can use to call it. So if I hit Control A on the keyboard, what it means is that I won't be able to edit the Boolean modifier again. So what I did was that I created a cube to subtract a specific portion of the number 2. I'm going to expand the cube now so you guys can see what I'm doing. So under modifiers, cube, I added a cube here. So here's the cube. You guys can see the cube here. So this is the cube I used to subtract that portion of number 2. So if I move it out of the way, you guys will see that it fills up back into place. So the reason why the cube is also affecting the array is because the cube is interacting with the original copy of the number 2. So if I go into edit mode, you guys can see that this is the original copy of the number 2 model inside the viewport. The rest of them are just copies created by the array modifier here. So whatever edits I'm making to the original will affect the copies made by the array modifier. But if I brought the Boolean modifier to the bottom, it won't affect the others. If I take it back to the top, it's going to affect them. So the way you arrange your modifiers in Blender matters to how the interactions will take effect in the viewport. So I'm going to hide this back. So you guys can see how it's cutting through number 2 object. So I'm creating these compositions to over the period of the 36 days. What I do is I come up with a simple idea and I try not to dwell on it so much, and I just execute it as quickly as I can to save time for the 36 days. So in that way, I'm able to avoid burnout. So I just make sure that my concepts are as simple as possible. I just do a quick sketch like you saw in Affinity, like I presented it in Affinity. So I just do a quick sketch. So to move on to the next object, next project here, which is, let's see, should be 9. Yes. So for 9, let me just switch to look there so you guys can see it. And it's here as well. 9. So for 9, I selected 9 because I wanted to show you guys something specifically here, which is this grid here. Let's open it here. So the floor of 9. That's it to Caleb Abstract Onion for designing the logo 9 for us. So this grid material here, I didn't create it myself. I got it online. So I'm going to show you guys how I set it up here. So the grid material allows you to generate, it's a procedural texture that generates a grid, these horizontal and vertical lines you are seeing that I used to create it here. This marble-like surface that you're seeing here in the final result here. So it allows you to create grids of different properties here. I'm going to drop the link to where I got it from here. So on YouTube, if you go to Anton Neveselov's page, you see the grid texture. So if you guys want to check it out here, we should place it in the chat box here. So you guys can open it on your own and check out the grid material here. So basically what the grid material does is to help you generate lines. It has different thicknesses, different values that you can play around with. So you can increase the size of the grids, you can increase the thickness of the lines, you can increase the size, whether you want it to be like really big or just very numerous. So you play with it to get the particular values you are looking for. You can increase the smoothness of the lines. Let me zoom in so you guys can see it. You can adjust the smoothness to create a blur effect. You can add a 3D effect to add depth to the lines here. And also add a second grid if you want to. There are more details in the video in the link I sent in the description. So you can add the second grid. Yeah, that's the second grid there. So there are 2 grids here now. So the process for this one follows the same pattern as I did in number 2 just now. So the only major difference between them is the grid here. And in this composition, I added a water texture. And I'm going to open it here. Let me select this. So if I go into face mode, in order to create this water, what I did was that I adjusted the metal texture. I added a bump note to it to create roughness. And you guys can see the reflection here. So I set the roughness to like 0.05. That's really low roughness to allow it to bounce a lot of light. You can see it here that it's bouncing off all the light and there's no roughness on it at all. And I set the metallic to 0 as well. So it doesn't appear like metal because the effect I'm trying to go for is like a swimming pool. And the water in a swimming pool. So the bump node is also getting data from a noise texture. And that noise texture is what you are seeing on the surface that is making it look like water really. So when I adjust it, you can see that it changes the scale of the roughness, you change the detail of the roughness as well to see whether you want more turbulence in the water. And the mapping node is added to it to allow the object to the roughness texture to be generated to be distributed uniformly on the surface of the texture. Now, this area of the swimming pool is not a separate object. It's a face on the object on the entire plane of the floor, entire floor plane. So right now I'm in the face mode. I'm currently editing this face in the edit mode. So it's hold on. Trying to open. Yeah. So an object can have, you just have to hit the duplicate key here and it will create another texture space for you, another area for you to add one of the textures to multiple objects. So if I added concrete now here, I can assign this concrete to this particular face. So I'm going to change this pool to concrete now. So it's added a concrete space here. So, or I can change that concrete to something else. Let's say to the plastic mode. Can change it to the abstract texture, change it to the glass texture, and I'm going to return it back to the water I created here. And readjust the roughness back so get the water back. So that's the major difference between this and number 2. A second here. Okay, so back to the water now. So this is the major difference between number 2 and number 9. The other difference is that in the array modifier I used for number 9 here, let me open it here. To create this staircase down here, same thing with the other one. I added an array modifier. I duplicated a cube with the array modifier. You can see the original cube at the bottom here. And this cube has 13 counts or 12 copies. The original at the base. Then I added an object called an empty to change the position of the steps of the copies. You can either use an empty or you can just adjust them using the offset values here. And depending on the values here, it will affect the positioning of the steps. So I'm going to open the empty now for you guys to see the empty. So here's the empty that controls the angle of the steps. So depending on how you adjust the empty, it will affect how the steps change. And there are many things you could do here in adjusting this empty, many effects you could come up with. Let me pull this thing out so you guys can see it. So if I rotated the empty, you can see you can have many different effects. There are many crazy things you could do inside Blender with the empty and the array modifier, many ways. So it's a matter of exploring and adjusting it to your desire. You can just take inspiration from the internet, from nature, and from many areas. So we're going to move to the next file now, which is go to J this time. So J is special in a way because I wasn't really too focused on the letter form itself. I was more focused on the composition and the background in particular. So what I did here was I wanted to align the horizon of the J and the corners of these slabs that I created here. So I'm going to open the original, the final file here for J for you guys to see. So for J, what I did was after I set up my camera, here's my camera here. Select my camera. Using the perspective camera, once I set up my camera, you'll see it's affecting the second view. I positioned the J in such a way that the lake I created using the water texture that I mentioned in the previous one just now, same arrangements. This one I didn't add the mapping node. If I added the mapping node now, set this to objects, and just wait for it to load it here. I'm going to disconnect it for now to save time. So what I did was, after I created that texture, I positioned all the objects and I added a rock texture into the lake or into the water, and I placed the J on top, because what I wanted was I wanted all the lines here to be aligned with the top of the J here. So I just moved all of them in that manner. So going to hold them all apart now. So the way I'm moving inside Blender is that I'm going to be using my Wacom. So if you're using a mouse and you want to move like this, you use the middle click of your mouse. You hold it down to move around like this in the viewport of Blender. And if you want to pan, as I'm panning right now, you hold down Shift on your keyboard using the middle click as well. And if you want to zoom in and zoom out like this, you use Control and you hold down the middle click on your keyboard. I'm sure you guys are seeing it. You guys are seeing the shortcuts here. So for anybody that wants to do something like this, I'm currently using a plugin called, I recently got the plugin now. Let me check the name. The plugin is called Canara. That's what it's called. Karnak rather. So if you want to make your shortcuts pop up while you're working, you can get it. So adjust the focus of my camera. I added an empty to my camera. So that empty allows me to adjust the depth of field. So it blurs out the background and keeps the focus on your object. But for J, I didn't add the depth of field because I wanted that horizon to show. The horizon created by the camera, I wanted it to show up in the final composition, as you can see here. But if I added that depth of field, the background will become blurry, as you guys saw just now. So you can see it becoming blurry here. Now, I'm going to show you guys the rock that I created here. So here's the rock, big rock under the J here. So I just placed it just a tad bit below, just a tad bit below the J. So the J is floating directly on top of it. Now to create that rock in Blender, all you have to do is go to Shift A on your keyboard and you go to landscape here. So this allows you to procedurally generate different landforms in Blender: mountains, rocks, volcanoes, dunes, like sand dunes, whatever you want to create here. And it allows you to create it directly inside Blender. All you have to do is you can generate random ones using the random seed here, whatever number you want. You adjust the size, the depth, and you make different crazy adjustments to it just to get your desired effects. There are many presets here, many different landform types that you can create. So I have something abstract, like just way random here. You can create like a large terrain, really large terrain, like a mountain range. You can create mounds as well. So you can just play with it and explore it for whatever compositions that you want to come up with. So the particularly special thing about J is the horizon. That's what I really wanted you guys to see here. So I adjusted the objects here using G on the keyboard. When you press G, it allows you to move your objects. And if you want to move the object along a specific angle, along a specific axis, say if you want to move it only along the x-axis, you just press X and it's locked to the x-axis. If it's Y, you press Y on the keyboard to the y-axis. If it's Z, you press Z on your keyboard and it will stick to the y-axis. If you want it along only two axes, say you want it along X and Y, you just shift Z, so it subtracts Z from the movements and you can only move it along the X and Y axis. If you want it along maybe X and Z, you shift Y, tap G, shift Y on the keyboard, so it only moves along the X axis and the Z axis. So these are like basic movements that you learn if you are trying to get the hang of Blender in general. So to the next one now, which is file, they all follow the same pattern here. So I'm going to use U. It's going to load it. Yeah. Let's open U here. So I want to close this and open U here. So for you, what makes you stand out is that I added a model, an astronaut model here, and the texture that I used for creating you is a computer generated texture. I'm going to show you guys how I did that here. So there's this program called JS Placements. It's loading right now. So this is JS Placements. So before I go directly into it, I want to show you guys what JS Placement does. JS Placement is a texture generator that allows you to create random computer-like, matrix-like patterns randomly. It was created by this digital artist. It's online. I'm going to paste the link for you guys to have a look at now here. So this is the official website for JS Placement. So the guy created it. He creates random procedurally generated, or rather randomly generated textures that are mainly computer-like sprite patterns that are of very high quality, like 8K resolution, that you can use in different 3D modeling workflows, especially for texturing. So it generates the color for you. Let me show you the colorizer. So creates different color patterns, different circuit patterns for you. And then once you save it to your computer, you can use it. So if I save the color now, I can use it here. If I save the normal allows you to create bumps or create displacements, save the heights. I'm going to paste the link in the chats now. So you guys can download it and play with it as well. So I'm going to go back into JS Placement now. Let's see. So there are different modes. This one creates this crazy matrix here. So you just play with it and adjust it as you wish. Add, toggle the colors, whatever kind of colors you want to apply to it. And that's how for this letter U, what I did here was I used the preference, the dot grid mode, to create this circuit board style effect where there are dots and patterns here. And I applied it to the U here. Let me open it now. So show you guys. 1 second. So for the U, after I added the floor, I added these rings here. That's the shifter. You go to curve and create a circle. Then, similar to what I did with the SVG, I just added depth to it here, simply like this, and then I resized it and placed it at the top here. And I added a array modifier, similarly like I did before. Added an empty to adjust the rings sizes here. So if I adjust this, you can see that the rings pattern changes. If I rotate it, you can see the effect it creates in the view. I added more copies to the ring. As you see that you can come up with some really interesting stuff here. To show you guys how I did this texture, let me expand this space so you guys can see the circuits. So when you're in here, this is the dot grid texture. So once I save it from JS placement, I load it into my assets list, and you can see the different textures I used. For this one, the name is dot grid, so I just load it in. Once I select the one I want, and I feed it into the node setup, it generates it for me here. And I add other shaders to it. Like this emission shader is what allows it to glow. That gives it those lights that you're seeing there. If I set it to 0, you can see that the lights go off. I put it back up to 100, the lights come on back. So the emission shader allows you to make the objects glow. The color ramp here adjusts which areas of the objects, which particular colors glow here. So the amount of glow is adjusted by the color ramp here. So depending on how much glow you want, how deep you want it, how much it spreads through the circuit, you use this color ramp to make that adjustment. The setup here for adding this what's it called, this texture, you have to make sure that you unwrap your UV. That is the mapping of how the texture is going to be generated on the object. So you make sure you go to U and you hit UV unwrap to make sure that it is uniformly placed along the body of your object, because if you don't unwrap it, it's going to become distorted. And you set texture coordinate to UV to make sure that you are in the right, it's the UV, the texture that is, the texture specifically that is being distributed across your object. So I added the principled BSDF and I added a bump node to it. And attached to the bump node is also another texture, which is the height map that I generated also with JavaScript. So adding that height map and the color map, I created this texture on the U. And something else I want to show you guys is the UV editor. If I go into edit mode, yeah, I select the faces, you can see the texture here now. So in certain situations, your texture will not distribute properly, and then you have to adjust it yourself here. So this front face of the U, I adjusted it myself inside this part, inside this viewport. That is the UV editor. So I have to, whenever you want to do this, all you have to do is hit tab, select the faces you want by going into face mode. Select the faces that you want to distribute across the texture, and you make the necessary adjustments. So you can see it moving in the viewport there. So depending on where I leave the faces, it will affect on the texture. The texture will project it accordingly in the final result. So I'm going to leave here now. Back to my shader editor and select this back. Now, the next part of this composition for letter U is the astronaut. So I didn't model the astronaut myself because that would take a lot of time to model from scratch. So what I did was I went online, I went to Sketchfab, which is a library and a marketplace where you can download a variety of textures in 3D. So there are free assets here you can download from Sketchfab that you can use in your own personal work. So I got this, and copy the link and paste it in the, so you guys can have it as well. So what you guys have to do is you have to create an account on Sketchfab to use it. So let's see here. Paste it here. So that's the link. So I added a little light here for extra atmospheric effects at the back of the model. And it is this light you see glowing behind him in the final result here. And the reason why you see it looking a little bit blurry with the focus on the U is because I added depth of field to it. So the astronaut also has this long wire going from his suit and just straight out of the frame. It goes all the way out of the frame here. And it goes all the way back. So if I go into my camera now, you guys will see it. So the curve I generated here is similar to the curve of the rings. So I go to the curve mode and I just added a Bezier curve, similar to the curve in the 2D program like Affinity Designer, Illustrator, and that's something I guess I should add. So you can, not apart from Affinity Designer, you can also do the same thing in Illustrator. Just export your logo as an SVG and bring it straight into Blender. Make sure that you don't add any gradients. Make sure you don't add any textures or noise from Illustrator or Affinity Designer, or else the logo will not load properly in Blender. So you have to remove all gradients and all textures and all colors from it in the original. Well, not all colors, just the gradients. So back to the curve. Yeah. Second. So I was trying to explain something. Sorry guys, give me a second. It seems like my Wacom is acting up. So to explain the camera, the empty I attached to my camera. Let me go straight to that empty now, so you guys can see it. So I used my regular camera and I attached an empty to it. Need to open the empty for you guys to see now, which is the targets that I made, that is listed here in the panel for the list of objects. So it is this target that determines where the focus of the camera is going to be. If you don't add the targets, it's going to be a lot difficult to adjust the focus and the depth of field. So it is that focus that is creating the blurry effect you are seeing in the final results. Yeah, so in this final result, it's the empty that's allowing the camera to focus directly on the letter U instead of the astronauts, the wires, or the background. So I pulled out the camera similarly to what I did in number 2, and I allowed it to focus on the U alone. The lights you are seeing in the middle of the U, let me take it there now. Let's go straight to the lights. So to create those lights, let's see. So to focus on those lights, what I did here was I added a spotlight at the center of the object that is glowing with a power of 50 watts. That's why it's glowing. And then I added a material to this cube, which is a volume material that I mentioned earlier. And I made sure that it was really increasing. I increased the density, so the light only shows the light. The light glows straight through the volume and also lights up the volume as well. So those are pretty much the 4 models that I'll be using for this presentation. So some key things I would like to mention to make sure you are consistent with the process or the flow of the 36 days. You have to make sure that you keep it simple as possible. Keep it as simple as possible. You make sure that your workflow, your scene is set up pretty much the same way all through. That's if you don't want to if you don't have the time and the energy to start sourcing for to start creating really different pieces all the time. You can reuse assets like I did. I got these astronauts from the internet, and you reuse textures, reuse lights, and that was pretty much what I did throughout the process. So instead of recreating my scene all the time, I can just duplicate, copy and paste the scene and resave it and then reuse it for the process. That was what I did throughout the entire 36 days. So if you want to avoid burnouts, just keep things simple to maintain consistency. You can even take rest days if you don't necessarily have to do all the 36, because the process, you learn a lot through the 36 days. You learn more about Blender, you learn more about logo design, depending on which approach you want to take for the 36 days of time, because you don't necessarily have to do it like this. You can approach it in a different style depending on what field you are in. So for me, I did it in this 3D style, converting the logos from the 2D design and placing them in this 3D exploration space, this 3D environment. Okay, something I didn't mention. For the circles on the top, what I added to them, the texture I added to them is a holographic texture, like a hologram, which I created using emission shaders and with the transparent shader. So all these textures are available in the link to the original texture. If you follow the project link at the bottom, there's a link that allows you to download the textures from 0 to 9 on Gumroad. So you guys can get it available for free there. So I believe this brings us to the end of the project breakdown. Hope you guys learned a lot from it. The objects are slowing down the system and they're bearing their weight on it right now because I've loaded quite a number of them already. But I'm glad we've got to the end of the breakdown. So if you guys have any questions, I'd love to hear them. Hello?
Hello, yeah, Nurudeen, can you hear me? my network is a bit bad here, but can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for that such session. Like, it's, I'm just here looking and just wow, this has been a very very insightful session. So, yeah, guys, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any feedback, you can unmute yourself or type it in the comments box. Yeah, it can just be anything really related to this session and maybe you're thinking around it. So please, I would really appreciate if you could get like a few comments or stuff.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Yeah, my name is Emmanuel Bello. Uh, did Akanni, did he leave? I think he left just now.
Yeah, I see that he just left. I don't even understand what's going on, but yeah, you could just go on and we'll see if he joins before you finish.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to just say like congrats to him for the creative work that he did. And also I want to know how you even got into Blender because it's unusual, like a logo designer to Blender. What was the process like? Beginner tips and what you can use to easily learn. That's what I wanted to ask.
Oh, okay. So let me see if I can also try to reach him.
Oh, he's back. He's back.
Okay, yeah, Nurudeen, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. I was trying to close something. I
Okay.
ended up closing the meeting.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
bro.
Yeah, so you have a question from Emmanuel. He gave a comment and yeah, just go ahead. Repeat yourself, please, Emmanuel.
Mr. Akoni. Oh, you're presenting.
Yeah, I'm here.
Mr. Akoni, I want to say that it's usually very unusual for like logo designers to be like learn Blender, and I want to congratulate you also for the creative achievement that you did for the 36 days of type. I also want to ask a question that how do like a beginner does it start with Blender? Like the basic skills you need to learn, tutorials, or like what's like a pathway for people like us that we have no idea what Blender is, or we don't even know we don't see Blender, we don't see and we move on, we don't even stress ourselves. What does it take? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, good question. So for Blender, or let me just say 3D packages in general now. The thing about them is that you have to have a certain like intention for what exactly you want to achieve using a 3D package, because the 3D space, not just Blender now, because this will determine if you want to stay organized, whatever specialty you want to go into in 3D will determine how you will approach the tutorials you will take. So for example, in my case now, what I did here using what my specialty here in Blender is creating abstract forms and environments, and to some level modeling of industrial objects like everyday objects. So if you wanted to approach Blender or 3D, the basics, you get a tutorial online. Like I started learning on YouTube and I took from there I moved on to getting actual courses to learn Blender and to learn the basics. A good place to start for Blender is to go to Blender Guru and take his donut course. It's right on YouTube. Just go to Blender Guru and take the donut course. That's where most people that use Blender actually start from. So if you want to start using Blender, you can start from there, and then from there you can consider what exactly you want to go into. Do you want to go into um, abstract environments like I'm doing? Do you want to go into industrial design, sculpting, modeling, animation, and any other specialty in the 3D industry? And for using as a logo designer, using a 3D object, it's you don't necessarily have to stick to logo design. You can use logo design professionally, or you can be a logo designer professionally and still have other skills in your assets. And that logo design would be your specific specialization that you use, that you present yourself as professionally in the market. And you can have this as a background skill that you are still learning and probably you want to use professionally eventually. And you can also combine the two skill sets by creating logo designs for brands and also adding 3D to your skill sets and using it to project the brand as well wherever they need 3D specialty or 3D services. Maybe you want to create abstract environments for them similar to this. or you can go down the road of someone like the Tatarka, go down the road of other 3D specialists like that create for brands, because brands use 3D a lot in marketing. And now with the advent of the metaverse, 3D is currently, the demand for it is increasing because there are, and the metaverse NFTs in general, I think there'll be better positioned people who can speak on metaverse and NFTs. But due to their advent, I've noticed that there's been an increase in demand for 3D users, 3D specialists. So if you want to go into 3D, you can. There are opportunities there. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Do you have any more questions? Victory, yeah, Victory, you have your hands up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Akanni. Good evening.
Evening.
I really appreciate what you've done so far, right? I think it's awesome. So, but I'm just curious, like, I mean, there are other options like to explore 3D on like Singapore D and a couple of other ones, right? Why Blender? Is it more like the workflows are like easy to get along with, or was what you could um just think with at the time you started?
Okay, so I started using Blender because when I initially went into 3D, originally started with, I think it was Maya, or I think either Maya or Autodesk. I think it was Autodesk Maya I started with. So I started with Maya and I just explored different 3D software for the one that I really, really, really like to use. I looked at Cinema 4D, I looked at Maya, I looked at 3ds Max, I looked at Blender, and I just realized that I think Blender would be a good fit for me. First of all, because it was free back then, and when I originally started, I didn't have the funds to afford something like Cinema 4D. Although now in Adobe After Effects, there's a light version of Cinema 4D that I use, and the reason why I use Blender majorly now is because I started using it. That's what I started learning with, because I realized back then when I just started, I couldn't go with Cinema 4D because Cinema 4D is also powerful. It's great for creating 3D motion graphics. I think I believe that's a specialty of Cinema 4D, and not just 3D motion graphics. It can be used for modeling and many other things. So all these 3D packages, they are all powerful in their own way. Blender is more of a generalist package which can do pretty much everything in a good way, but it also has its own limitations. And Blender is constantly evolving because the community and the developers that are around it, although it's free, it's open source, but it's constantly evolving. Blender today is um, way, way, way better than how Blender was like 3 or 4 years ago, because they revamped the UI, they revamped the ease of use. There are many improvements that have been made to it, many effects and many possibilities with it. And Blender has been used before. Blender wasn't as respected in the industry for creating movies and the like, but now Blender has been used in many Hollywood specials, and it has been used for VFX and many areas in 3D and game development. It can be used for modeling for augmented reality and virtual reality. It can be used for in the NFT space and metaverse, like I mentioned before. So it has a wide variety of applications, and the same applies to other 3D programs. But I started using Blender back then because it was the next option for me after Cinema 4D. But you can start if you want. If a person wants to start, when it comes to difficulty, Blender has a steeper learning curve than Cinema 4D. Although it can eventually be grasped once one focuses on it consistently over a period of time. You eventually understand the shortcuts and the modes around it. And it's not like you have to learn every single thing and put everything in your head. There are communities around Blender. That you can ask questions for things you don't understand, and you can learn many new things. There are lots of resources and assets that are free online, and that are paid, that you can also purchase as well in learning it. Courses on YouTube, courses off YouTube on other platforms like Udemy, and other learning platforms as well to learn the basics. So you can just start simply by creating a cube. That's the simplest thing you can create in Blender. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, sure. Well, sorry, can I just ask a little bit more? So when it comes to, from what I heard you saying, so apparently you can use the two softwares now, like Blender and Cinema 4D, and apparently you also have experience with Maya and all that, right? So when it comes to like the relevance of the skill you have at like, the skill you've gotten using Blender, right? Is it like an easy switch or like a cross-functional use between all of these tools? I don't even get the context of what I'm asking.
Yes, I understand what you are saying. So in terms of cross-functionality of it depends on how familiar you are with 3D programs in general. The thing is, they have different shortcuts, they have different UX. So how you approach Blender and how you approach Cinema 4D, there may be some similarities, but overall the workflow will change. I don't use Cinema 4D as much as I use Blender. I use Blender as my main like 3D program. The Cinema 4D I use once in a while. I use Cinema 4D Lite. It doesn't have as much capabilities as the standalone Cinema 4D program. The Cinema 4D Lite I use is inside After Effects. It's a collaboration between Maxon Cinema 4D and Adobe. So Cinema 4D Lite is integrated into Adobe After Effects. It's a smaller and lighter version of the original Cinema 4D. It doesn't have as much capabilities and functions as the standalone version. But when it comes to cross-functionality and being able to switch from Blender to Cinema 4D or to any other 3D package, it depends on having a general knowledge of 3D programs. That's first of all, and how to navigate them in general, because you know that, okay, you're in a 3D space, you have to zoom in, zoom out, rotate, expand, pan around the objects. So having that knowledge will give you a bit of a head start when you want to start, if you want to switch from one program to another. Like the shortcuts that I mentioned are panning, rotating, and zooming now in Blender. They won't be the same if you were in Cinema 4D. The shortcuts would be entirely different. How you would navigate the UI would also be entirely different. Hope you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I really appreciate that. Thanks.
Welcome.
All right. Any more comments from Godwin, from Ibrahim, from Olakbekba? Anybody else?
So hi.
Hi.
So thank you very much, my Oga the top for this tutorial. This session alone is worth $100, but you've given us on a platter of good. And also thanks to Asha Koteri for giving us this opportunity. So my a quick question is like how difficult would you say learning 3D softwares are? Or what are the challenges you faced when you were learning?
Okay, good question. So learning 3D software from the start, from scratch, it's I see it more as a matter of the choice of software you start with, the amount of resources you have at your disposal, the power of the machine you are using to learn the software, because that plays a major role in how easy it is for you to not get frustrated. So what I would say is that when you are starting out and you want to learn Blender or any other 3D software, what I'll say is get a good enough system that can handle 3D rendering. Each software has its requirements, or rather the requirements depend on what exactly you want to pull off within the software. Maybe it is low poly modeling you want to do, or you actually want to do high quality, high definition texturing, modeling, and sculpting and rendering or animation. So you have to consider all these things when you're choosing the machine you want to use for 3D animation or 3D illustration. And the difficulty level depends on the software you want to begin with. Like I know Blender is a lot more difficult. Blender is harder to start with than Cinema 4D, but it's not impossible. It's just a matter of time and getting the tutorials, and you get the hang of it eventually. So if you want to start, just start with the base, like we started with the 2D software. If you're already in 2D, so you start with the basics as usual. So it's not much having the understanding of already the principles of design generally will already help you in understanding some of those principles. But the tool itself, understanding the tool itself, it's not very difficult. It's just a matter of getting used to the shortcuts and navigating the UI in general, as far as I know. Then the rest is just a matter of understanding the fundamentals of 3D modeling in general.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. That was helpful.
All right. I think that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this. Thank you for the time, and even